Thanks so much for being here. This is my second session. I will say it's somewhat funny. There are more people interested in TikTok than just a healthy relationship with politics in general. So hopefully I can deliver here. I run a news organization. We summarize the biggest, most visible news of the day and then pair it with a brief biblical reminder, something foundational. They're pre-written, not speaking into specific events, but just reminders that we all need. So I'm here to talk about news in the TikTok era, and we'll get there. I'm going to talk a fair bit about TikTok specifically, but I want to start with just kind of an overview of the news in general, because a lot has changed with the news, and a lot of the issues that people are facing with the news are just true of all news or most news in 2024 and are also true of TikTok, but they're not specifically blamed on TikTok. So start with a brief history of the news, and we'll go way back. A story you have probably heard. In 490 BC, legend says that a man named Phidippides ran from Marathon to Athens, yelled Nike, the Greek word for victory, and then fell over dead. And he was announcing that the Greeks had defeated the Persians and that information needed to travel. There are some questions about what is true and not true about this. It's not totally sure whether or not Nike, the company, has commandeered the company to say he only yelled the one word for victory. It's not sure whether or not he literally fell over dead right away. I personally question whether or not this story of him dying after running 25 miles should inspire people to run 25 or 26 miles still to this day. But one thing is not in question, and that is if there was big news in Marathon that needed to go to Athens urgently and quickly and to as many people as possible, that the most effective way that information could be transported is to have a human being run as fast as they could and then yell. Like that was how news traveled over distance and how news reached the masses. Someone carried the news and then you yelled, and everyone that could hear it was informed. So news for most of history was periodic, meaning it was not constant, and it took time to travel distance, and updates were slow in coming, and it was privileged in that not everyone had access to all the same information, and if you learned news, then you knew it and other people likely didn't have access to it. News was periodic and it was privileged, and this was just true because of the laws of nature for a very long time. Now, in 1440, we had a major advancement. Any history buffs, what happened in 1440? Printing press, that's right. So we got better at communicating to the masses. Now you didn't just have to yell. If you wanted to communicate information to lots of people at once, you could write it once and then print it, and then you still had to carry it to them, and you had to find someone that could read, and most people couldn't read, but this was a big advancement, okay? Then fast forward 400 years, and in 1832, Samuel Morse invents the telegram. So now you can communicate information over long distances very quickly. Now, instead of just running or grabbing your horse and going to share the information, you could run or grab your horse to one of the few telegram stations and then tap out in Morse code a very short message that would go to one of the few other telegram stations. But again, a big advancement. You could instantaneously communicate over some distance. The advancements start kind of coming fast and quick now. 40 years later, in the 1870s, we get the telephone. You can communicate much more info over those distances. In the 1920s, you get the first radio news broadcast. So anyone with a radio, you're communicating to the masses and over distance. 20 years later, in the 1940s, you get the first TV news broadcast. And then I want to camp briefly in the 1960s and 70s. So this is kind of the golden era of news in the United States. Walter Cronkite has his CBS Evening News. He tells America the way it is. And well, how long, so his show ran for 20 years roughly. How long do you think each episode of Walter Cronkite's Evening News was? 30 minutes. I guarantee you everyone thought that it was an hour before this. It actually started as 15 minutes. Walter Cronkite's show was 15 minutes, and then due to the huge success, it became the first 30-minute news program ever, and it remained a 30-minute news program until he did his final sign-off. And in those 30 minutes, he covered the JFK assassination, the moon landing, Watergate scandal, all these big things. And it did not require a 24-hour news cycle. You got 30 minutes of news that Walter Cronkite told you what was happening in the world. At the same time, most places have one newspaper. And if you're in a big city, maybe you have a few more. But you have one newspaper in part because most towns cannot support more than one newspaper. Like, running a news business was very expensive. You needed to hire journalists. You needed to have a printing press. You needed paper and ink and an army of 9-year-olds to deliver the papers to all the doors. And so one of the things that this economic pressure did to the news industry is when you have one news organization, it was pretty down the middle. Like, it was objective, kind of politically neutral news because they literally financially could not afford to alienate half their readers. So there's this strong economic incentive for objective reporting. And I'll also say it's inherently yesterday's news. It still takes time to report. This is within living memory. There are people in this room that were alive in the 60s and 70s. Like, this sounds so foreign, and this is what the news was very recently. So now let's camp out in what the news looks like today. I can get with an internet-connected device, updates immediately on what is happening on the other side of the world. I can get hourly, minute-by-minute updates on the war in Gaza or the wars in the Middle East. I can instantly know what happens in Washington, D.C., and that's because these two things, news is no longer periodic and it's no longer privileged. Technology has made it so that anyone, basically anyone for free, anyone with internet access and a device can communicate with everyone else who has internet access and a device. And so because of this, the economic model has completely upended. Where there used to be this economic pressure to be neutral because you needed appeal to everyone, there's now this economic opportunity where you just need to carve out your niche. Like, you are your niche. If you can report the news in a slightly different way, or you can report very niche news. I mean, so 50 years ago, the news, when you talked about the news with someone, you were talking about the news. You both watched the same show, you both read the same newspaper, and that is what a news junkie was in that day. You spent like an hour consuming the news. You can now literally spend every waking moment consuming Taylor Swift news. You can spend every waking moment consuming sports news, business news, politically conservative news, politically liberal news, world news, pickleball news. Pick your niche. You can spend all day, every day, and you don't remotely scratch the surface of the news that is being produced. So this, I think, is the biggest problem and issue with people this generation and Gen Z all the way up to boomers or whoever is beyond boomers. Like, we all have the same problem. There are no generational habits around the news.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Kwame, and I have been serving in youth ministry at Centennial Church in Forest Lake, Minnesota for more than 20 years. I'm also the author of More to the Story, Deep Answers to Real Questions on Attraction, Identity, and Relationships. And I've had the honor to write Rooted's new curriculum on biblical sexuality. It's It's a 9-week short study that goes through key passages in Scripture about the topic of human sexuality. And our hope and prayer with it is that it would help students to see why their sexuality matters so much and how they can honor God with their bodies and their relationships. We also hope and pray that it is a tool for you as you navigate the tough questions that our students are asking with gospel truth.
The news used to be naturally filtered for us. You would know a lot about your local town and news because, well, let's go back. Let's imagine Jesus' day, okay? And Jesus is a bad example because he's God, but someone else in Jesus' day, they would know what was going on in their town because that's what you could hear news about. And any news that they heard from farther away, the farther you went, the less you knew about it because the news needed to be bigger and worth it and still relevant after the weeks that it traveled to show up. So you'd hear about, now I'm mixing time periods, but like back in the US, you'd hear about who won the election, but you don't get hourly updates about what the candidates are doing. Teddy Roosevelt, who was president in the 1900s, was famous for just leaving the White House and hunting for like a month. He'd just disappear and be like, I just need some time. I'm going to go hunt. And he'd go off alone into the woods. The sitting president of the United States. We now know if Joe Biden or Donald Trump or Kamala Harris like steps into a different door than they typically do. It's just everywhere. So there's just too much information, and it used to be filtered, but now it's not. So we have to filter it. And this is the big issue. There's too much news, and there's no history, there's no generational wisdom, there's no habits, there's no boundaries for us to filter the news. It used to be a virtue to be aware of what was going on in the world. Like, it was virtuous and good to watch Walter Cronkite and be an informed citizen. And part of the reason it was virtuous and good is because it took a little bit of effort. The news was a little dry, but you were being informed and you knew what was going on. It is not a virtue to know what is going on anymore, but we still act like it is. We still act like, oh, it's good for me to follow the news. Is it? Like, you're going to hear about the big things. And so we need to filter. It takes discipline and intentionality to limit the amount of news so that you don't become overwhelmed or obsessed. So my first piece of advice is for you to intentionally limit the news and be intentional with where you get the news. So pay attention and choose where you're getting the news from, how you're receiving it. There is a difference between reading the news and watching the news and listening to the news. And just how much you're consuming. So we recommend, the Pour Over and NewsHealth recommends 5 to 15 minutes a day of written news. Now, we also produce a podcast, so you can listen to that. But the podcast is an audio version of our newsletter. It takes like 6 minutes, and the idea is it is a summary of what's going on, and we're trying to model filtering the news, and it's 5 to 6 minutes 3 times a week. So there's still a lot of time for you to go and exercise your own filter and get info from other things. Now to TikTok. I do think that the biggest issue with news on TikTok is that there's just too much of it, which is the same as news not on TikTok. But there are some unique TikTok-y things specifically about the news. So who here, we'll do a show of hands, who here has a TikTok account? Okay. Has anyone here posted on TikTok? Like you produce content? A little bit? Okay. Few people have posted some things. So I'm going to talk. I posted on TikTok for like 6 weeks. I'm not TikTok famous. I wasn't very good at it, but I learned a lot. And I'm just going to help explain TikTok a little bit. One of the great innovations or significant innovations that TikTok did is each individual post and video has to earn its own way. This is very different than on Facebook, or at least the way Facebook and Instagram used to be. You used to follow a person and you'd get whatever they posted. Like you followed friends and family, maybe a celebrity, and whatever they posted, regardless of whether or not that content was good, you got it because you followed them. That is very similar to the way the pour over works today, primarily in email newsletter. You give us your email, we show up in your inbox. Regardless of what the news is, we'll show up, you get it, and we know roughly, we know actually very closely how many people are going to open next week's news. We don't know what next week's news is, but we know we have about 1 million subscribers or a little less and a little over 50% open rate. So there's going to be about 500,000 people that open and read this news. We don't know what it is yet, but that's what's going to happen. That is not how TikTok works. TikTok, when you post a video, it is shown to 300 to 500 people. And depending on how those 300 to 500 people interact with the video determines whether or not it's shown with anyone else. So if you just post a video of you doing something random and uninteresting, it will get 300 to 500 views. And it will not get more than that because those people won't watch the entire video, they won't replay it, they won't like it, they won't comment, whatever, and so the video is just going to die. That is true, generally, even if you have 1 million followers. So you would get more than that because there's a separate place you can go to just look at people who follow news, and big accounts have loyal followings where they'll seek out the stuff. But the algorithm is going to be fed for that celebrity to 300 to 500 people, and if the content is not interesting, it will just die. So this changes the incentives a lot. Now the good news is that means if you're seeing a video on TikTok, other people liked it and it's good content. It's engaging content. So of the people who are on TikTok, if you watch a 30-second video of some dog doing something funny and you watch it on repeat, what happens? Oh my gosh, it's like TikTok doesn't care who you follow. They found out that you like dogs, they got dogs. They're just showing you dogs. That's all you're gonna see. And they find videos, they're like, hey, other people that like dogs like this video, so we'll show them that video. And your whole page it is called the For You page. And it's for you. It doesn't matter who you followed. It's just dogs now. So think about what that does for news that is being shared on TikTok. With me and the pour over, we summarize the biggest news of the day. Sometimes that's really engaging. Sometimes we're like, man, this is kind of a slow news day, But it doesn't matter. We write about it. It shows up in your inbox. You say, I want to know what is going on today. That's why I signed up for the pour over. So you read it. My incentive is to deliver what I promised, which is the news of the day with a biblical reminder. And like I said, we know how many people are going to open it. That allows us to sell our premium ad placements with partners that we work with directly, sell those far out. We know how much money we're going to make. We know how many people are going to open it. It's this that's what the incentive is. When we're sharing news on TikTok, if the news is slow, if there's no exciting news, there's no reason for us to even make a video. It won't be shown to people. Why would we put in the effort to make a boring video? It will be seen by 300 to 500 people and no one else. So the incentive is for someone sharing the news is to only share news that is really engaging. And if it's a slow news day, or if there's someone random who doesn't have a following but just wants to get a video with a lot of views and become TikTok famous, there is a very real, understood incentive that, hey, if you stretch the truth a little bit or just make this more engaging, the video will do better. Like there is, especially for people who are only on TikTok and don't have a following elsewhere, what incentive is there not to just completely make up a story that's really fascinating and engaging? Because you're going to get a lot of views and face no repercussion. There's a strong incentive and no downside.
We are thrilled to announce Rooted's new book with New Growth Press, The Jesus I Wish I Knew in High School, Asian American Edition. Being a teenager is itself an overwhelming experience, but the struggles unique to Asian American teenagers can often lead them to wonder if anyone truly knows what they're going through. In this book, 12 authors come alongside Asian American students to share their own high school experiences, helping students to see how Jesus makes a difference in our unique struggles. Jesus sees them and knows them fully. These testimonies of growing up Asian American include struggles with belonging, performance pressure, fear of failure, living in an honor-shame culture, eating disorders, sexual assault, and adoption. The writers now walk faithfully with Jesus in their ethnic and cultural distinctions. These stories lift up the Asian American experience with dignity, offering representation and belonging. We hope you'll read this book and share it with the Asian American teenagers in your home or church.
Kind of doom and gloom when it comes to news on TikTok. I will say, so the question of the session is, who can you trust? And stepping outside of TikTok, just to the news in general, there's a ton of it. It's always going. I would say, this is the question, who can you trust, or where do I get my news, which is the same question, is the most frequent thing that I'm asked. And I think people expect me to say something that they've never heard of, but will like implicitly trust and are so excited that there's like some mythical objective news source that I have that you guys don't have. It doesn't exist. And I get my news from a little bit from everywhere. I kind of cover the whole spectrum. And some of that is because I have changed what I'm looking for in the news. When before and even early on in the pour over, the natural inclination and what I assume most of you want is like, just tell me what actually happened. You know, like I just want to know what really happened and be honest and truthful and explain the motivations and help me but be objective with it. That doesn't exist, and it can't ever exist in the way we want it to. And we know this. Like the idea that there is some organization that can just tell you neutrally what actually happened in an event, any event that's big that happened anywhere in the world, is a ridiculously high and unattainable request. This is why we have courts and judges. Two people will see the same thing and disagree over what actually happened, to the point that we have like a third of our government dedicated to saying, well, someone's got to decide, and so they'll listen and then bang a gavel and make a decision. And yet we just expect that these news organizations can do this for a bunch of places that they aren't even at perfectly accurately. So it's an exercise in futility. But if you change, like I did, what I'm trying to get out of the news, which is I now want to know, specifically for the pour over, it makes this very explicit for me because this is what I'm trying to write. But you can do it too. What you're trying to find out is, what are people hearing? What are people talking about? Because then, if suddenly Fox and CNN are both very reliable sources of news. If you're trying to understand what conservatives and people who watch Fox News are hearing, go to Fox. Like you'll be able to tell. And same thing with CNN. So they become reliable sources of information where you can then engage with people who, if you're trying to minister and understand or love someone who's consuming too much Fox News, spend a little bit of time reading Fox News. See what they're hearing so that you can understand and relate with them. Same thing with CNN or MSNBC or someone who's liberal. So that is an attainable goal. And I will say it also, I have found, is the best way to somewhat understand what is, quote unquote, actually happening. Because when CNN and Fox both say that this thing happened at this place and they basically report the same thing, it's like, all right, well, that's probably what happened because they rarely agree. And so I have maybe actually learned what is going on in the world. But we have to let go of this idea that we will perfectly know what happened. Now, on TikTok, who can you trust? And I would say social media in general. Bad news, my answer is that you should be skeptical of basically everything you see on social media because the incentives are just wrong. Like, there is an active incentive, an opportunity for people to be dishonest because the algorithm doesn't reward honesty, it rewards novelty and engagement. So now, that said, TikTok is a platform that just shares information, and there are good creators and people on TikTok. We were talking last night at dinner. Someone was sharing that someone in their youth group came to know Christ because of TikTok. They kind of got on Christian talk. So that's another thing about TikTok, if you don't know. The For You page is different for everyone, and they will literally call it different things. So people will be like, oh, I'm on Book Talk. And that just means their For You page is just all books because they like books, and so it's all about books. So there is Christian talk, and there are great, orthodox, wonderful people who are on TikTok that are sharing information and reaching people on TikTok. But the algorithm does not inherently optimize for that. It just optimizes for engagement, so we should be skeptical. Now, the people that are most trustworthy on TikTok or social media in general are going to be people that are most trustworthy off TikTok and social media. And so if there is a reputable news organization that is also on TikTok, they are very unlikely to fabricate something on TikTok for views. They have a reputation to maintain, and so they are going to try to use TikTok to further their larger goal. Also, I will say there is someone who has a larger following. There's just inherently more accountability. TikTok is also very good at just roasting people and holding people accountable. So if a video goes viral that is untrue, you can expect 1,000 videos debunking it that then go viral and call this person an idiot. It's typically not done in the most gracious, loving way, but there is some accountability within TikTok. But you might just see the first video and be thinking wrong. So videos or creators that have a larger following tend to be more reputable. They're less likely to just make something up completely. I want to just give some general advice. I am a millennial, and I had a Facebook account, never really lost track of time on Facebook. I never had Instagram. I got TikTok and began wasting my life on TikTok. All of you are capable of loving TikTok. Give it time. Do not judge Gen Z for loving TikTok. You would love TikTok. The algorithm is so blatant, it figures out who you are, and it just gives you what you want. It is like the definition of what addicting is. You just give it an hour of scrolling to figure out what you like, and you don't have to be intentional. Just scroll. You will naturally wait a little bit longer on videos that you like and move past other things quicker, and pretty soon you're just going to have adorable dogs looking at you all day, and you will waste your day. So I think it is, I hesitate to advise, but if you've never been on TikTok, I think there is some value in doing it and being humbled by how human you are and good the algorithm is. I now am still on TikTok. I have it cuts off after 15 minutes, and I do not know the password. And you better believe I do not text my best friend and ask for more TikTok time, because I have more pride than that. But I checked last night, and over the last week, my average time on TikTok was slightly over 14 minutes. So I think of myself as someone who is rarely on TikTok, and I apparently use every allowable TikTok moment that I have on TikTok. So be humbled. And I would also say, and I know this is mostly pastors, but I would forcibly limit your time on TikTok if you're on it. I think there is great potential for value in TikTok, in my opinion, it is just not outweighed by the great potential of distraction and sin that is on TikTok. So if you are going to do it, forcibly limit your time. And if there are people in your life that live in your household that you can exert a authority over, I would limit their time. And yes, we need to train them to be good. I am an adult that lives on my own, and I need someone else to limit my time. And I am not uniquely prone to addiction to social media. And we'll have time for questions, but by way of wrap up, the news in the TikTok era, I would say the single biggest issue is there's just too much news. And you need to be your filter and recognize, like, it is okay that we all got this wrong. It came up quickly. Our parents and our grandparents didn't need to be disciplined in this area. We suddenly do. But that means we suddenly do, and we need to be intentional and think about where we're getting our news from and forcibly limiting our time. And when it comes to social media, the algorithm is optimized for entertainment. It wants to keep you on the platform, and that is the very explicit, well-understood incentive that creators feel. And so they are not, first and foremost, trying to objectively inform you. They are trying to create a video that you will watch, because otherwise you won't watch it, you won't see it. So be skeptical of what is on TikTok for that reason.